It's an early start for Dave Whitfield to unload his Canadian canoe. He's a bird expert and also ex-president of Hastings Birdwatchers for well over a decade. Bryce Taylor is the records officer for Hastings Birdwatchers. He's the skipper of the Dolphin, which is the survey boat that goes out once a month for the Wader bird count.
I've been a member of the Hastings Birdwatchers since 2004, and I've been regularly surveying Pelican Island during that time. We record all the birds counted on that morning for that month, always in the same locations on and around Pelican Island, and that's at high spring tides when they are roosting and not feeding. They're gathered in small areas and are easy to count at that time. We record the migratory shorebirds that spend summer here, and then they fly to Russia and Alaska for our winter. We also record the sedentary shorebirds. The data is entered online into the Shorebirds 2020 Atlas of Australia, and then it's used to update the national database. All that we look at mostly to see the trend in population. And there you'll see that's gone from around about 500 down to about 100. And that's typical of the waders. Since we started recording in 1985, they've dropped to about 1/5 their original numbers. The overall cause of the decline is human impact. Of major importance is the loss of mudflats in China and Korea around the Yellow Sea. It's an essential feeding stopover on the Asian flyway. Other causes are tourist activities in the estuary, powerboats, paddleboarders, people with dogs, and feral animals such as the fox. The future of the migratory shorebirds looks pretty grim. We have to preserve and maintain the roosting and feeding areas for these birds in both hemispheres.
All the birds that arrive at Pelican Island in September have travelled huge distances. Some have flown stretches of 10,000 kilometres without landing. They have also come from lots of different places. The eastern curlew from Central Asian grasslands. Red knots and ruddy turnstones from tundra overlooking the Arctic Ocean, and bar-tailed godwits from Alaska. At the end of our summer, most birds fly north to Siberia and Alaska to breed, They link up with others from all over the world who are also going north, from Europe, from Africa, and from America. Every species has its own migration route that runs from north to south and back. Collectively, these are called flyways. Pelican Island is part of the East Asian Australasian flyway. They fly at heights of 5,000 to 6,000 metres. Oxygen at this level is 50%. They can tolerate this more effectively than humans. Godwits fly at about 60 kilometres an hour, flapping their wings most of the way. They use up the stored fat plus some of their muscle tissue that they increased before the flight. Double-banded plovers migrate from the stony braided riverbeds, lakesides and ocean beaches of New Zealand's southern island. They come to Australia during the winter and return to breed for the New Zealand summer. High tide pushes the waders further up the sandy banks, where they spend their time roosting, which means resting and sleeping, unable to access their food at this time. They roost in large or small groups, with their beak tucked under their wings, standing on one leg. Sometimes just standing about in groups together, waiting for the tide to turn. It is vital after such huge journeys that they rest and recover. Often a quiet place is hard to find, as they are vulnerable at this time. The Yellow Sea supports 80% of the flyway population during their northern migration. When South Korea built its 20-mile seawall to reclaim mudflats, it killed the entire estuary. The birds didn't go somewhere else. They landed where the estuary should have been. The food was no longer there, and they died. They don't have the energy to go to other food sources. High tide is the best time for us to count them, as they're grouped together and fairly still and less disturbed. Pacific golden plovers, wimbles and curlews. The eastern curlew is very site specific. It always returns to the same place. It won't survive if you take that away. Now listed as critically endangered, global population decline is by 80% in the last 30 years. At 60 centimetres, it is the largest shorebird and easily recognised by its downward-shaped beak, designed for eating crabs, shrimp, prawn, mollusks and insects from mudflats and shoreline. The tidal cycle dominates life. Every estuary and every sandbank has a different structure according to its location and makeup, and so the food source responds accordingly. Shorebirds feed amongst tidal areas on a range of crustaceans, bivalves and worms, ensuring the ecological balance of these areas is maintained. The bar-tailed godwit can move its bill like a pair of tweezers to pick up delicate prey items. Most birds use their bills for two basic functions, feeding and preening. Almost every size and shape occurs within the shorebirds. Long or short, curved or straight, evolved for each individual species. Eastern curlew, double-banded plover, whimbrel, grey-tailed tattler, Pacific golden plover, redneck stint, bar-tailed godwit, grey plover, red knot, and ruddy turnstone. During the months before their migration, bar-tailed godwits increase their body weight by up to 60 to 70%. Most is stored as fat. They also increase their flight muscles, while at the same time they reduce the weight of some of their organs. When the birds arrive in September, their feathers have supported a round journey to Siberia and Alaska and back. So after a recovery period, they will start the molting process, which may take up to 120 days to complete. Once the molt is well advanced, the next stage of coloration begins. The males develop patches of orange chestnut on their breasts and bellies, and their backs and shoulders turn dark and tawny. There is also geographical indications on colour intensity. Brighter, darker birds in Siberia, with paler males being identified in Alaska. So it's still a mystery whether colour signifies camouflage or for female attraction. They get so fat before they fly north that in New Zealand they call them flying bricks. All of these long-haul travellers are summer visitors to Pelican Island. The smallest migrator is the red-necked stint, the size of a sparrow, weighing as much as a matchbox. Double-banded plovers are the only New Zealand migrant, arriving for the winter and returning home in the early spring. Part of the bird count is done from the hide. Not all shorebirds are overseas migrants. Australian shorebirds are here permanently. Red-capped plovers are little and very sweet. They're found in estuaries, bays, beaches and mudflats, as well as inland. Indigenous to Australia and widespread. They feed in small flocks, along the water's edge, mainly on small invertebrates. With an estimated population of only 4,000, the sooty oystercatcher is seen in pairs or small flocks. They usually prefer rocky coastlines that support a diet of hard shellfish like limpets, mussels, and even sea urchins. Pied oystercatchers prefer mudflats and sandy beaches. Both sexes are similar, however the female has a slightly longer, more slender bill. Oystercatchers use their long, strong bills to cut open the adductor muscles of mollusks that hold the two halves of a bivalve together to access the soft, edible body inside. Young pied oystercatchers are one of the few waders that are fed by their parents using this specialised technique. Both parents share parenting duties. They forage at low tide for mollusks, worms, small crustaceans and fish, using that chisel-like bill to break into pippies and other shellfish. We now have at least 2 breeding pairs with eggs laid in a shallow scrape just above the high tide mark. They have successfully hatched chicks for several years now. The beachstone curlew is critically endangered in New South Wales. We now have 2 on Pelican Island, which are regarded with great respect, not always easy to see or find. Sometimes seen on the sand flats, foraging for crabs and invertebrates. They are very shy and easily disturbed, preferring quiet, isolated areas of beach or the cover of the mangroves. Mangroves are an obvious feature of the island and a very important habitat, as they provide food and shelter for the juveniles and adults of many fish species. The grey mangrove here is the most common, growing from 3 to 10 metres. They thrive best in estuaries with a mix of fresh and salt water, excreting excess salt through their long, thick leaves and absorbing oxygen through their aerial root system. This magnificent nest belongs to a pair of ospreys that have successfully bred here for many years. The general environment is a reliable food source and supports many different native species. One of the osprey pair here is seen enjoying a freshly caught fish for breakfast, while the white-faced heron below is catching the falling bits. These night herons are close neighbours. And so is the Brahminy kite. These waters are also the darter's domain, along with the wood swallows. There are so many different birds that thrive here. The IUCN estimates more than 70% of all plants and animals at risk of extinction are being affected by habitat loss and fragmentation. I wonder, how many migratory birds will we be counting in 10 years' time? As we head into the open water, a native flotilla of little black cormorants glides past in the early morning sun. Now it's time for us to leave the mangroves and get back to the marina. We're finally back at the wharf and really ready for that cup of tea. Another Pelican Island bird count comes to a close. And greeted by the resident welcome committee, we need to care about what happens on Pelican Island.